Thank you so much. Okay, we're gonna get started. So, doing just a few rules. During anybody who is present on this stage, we just ask that you please silence your cell phones as well as your voices when people are presenting, just to be respectful to them. So, radiant day to everyone that has joined us today, and thank you again for being here. Gonna start off with a little story. I was doing some research on how to give a welcome speech, and this is my first time, so go easy on me, please. But I was going through YouTube and looking at articles and going through some books about radical candor on how to give the most proper welcome speech. And a lot of my notes were all over the place. It was, don't start off with, oh, just welcome guys, and thank you for coming, and you know, the basics, the borderline, the bare minimum, right? So I found Brene Brown TED Talk, and I started watching through some of her stuff, and I love how she started with a story. And so I'm going to give you guys a story of mine today. I will never forget the first time I stood on a stage to present something. The year was 2009. I was a high school senior at Hermitage High School. I joined our high school's drama club, which was a very interesting concept for me because I love to talk. Though I never actually thought that I'd be good at the drama club, and the only reason why I did it was because my English teacher was pretty much twisting my arm to be on it, go figure. And she really thought that picking up the electives was going to be very good for me as well. So fast forwarding into drama club, I am working on a play with my peers called For the Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. Some of you may be familiar with the Tyler Perry film of that title, or the original works of a choral poem written by Inosake Shange. The story is about a group of Black women housed in Harlem, New York, all facing major personal challenges, who come together to share their experiences, their vulnerabilities, as well as they embrace one another so that each one of them can find that source of healing to move forward. A story of strength, courage, and resilience. When I showed up for my first day of practice of the play, I mistakenly thought that I knew nothing about what it was to be colored, Black, or even Indigenous. I thought, now why in the world does my white English teacher want me to play a part that is meant for women who are a lot more Black or Blacker or more Black than I am? As a high school senior, I learned a lot, but only a few things. 1, my mother's mother is Caucasian. 2, my mother's father is Native American, Upper Mattaponi Indian to be exact. And 3, my father was African American. Within those 3 things, I assumed because I was extremely lighter than most of the Black girls that I went to high school with, I was certainly not fit for the seat on this ride. To do our very best in this play, my English teacher assigned the choral poem as homework and had us pick character names from a hat. So that way there was not going to be any bloodshed over who was going to play who. You had to stick to what you actually picked and not be mad at her about it, right? So I picked a piece of paper, I unfolded it, and silently and subconsciously dropped to the floor. Bo Willie, it says. Out of all the parts that I could have picked, I picked a man married to a Black woman named Crystal, who refuses to marry him because his PTSD is so violent. And when she refuses to marry him, he becomes more infected by his delusions and rage that he single-handedly drops their 2 children out of their 6th floor apartment window. I was thinking, this is not it. I am not fit for this at all. I was scared. I went to my English teacher and asked her to please transfer me into another play. West Side Story is where I feel I was most safest. Without any remorse, she shook her head and she said, "Make it work. I believe in you, Raven." Now I'm thinking she's definitely crazy, because how am I supposed to make this work? How am I supposed to tap into this type of character? I go home, in such awe, right? I talked to my mother about it and she said, "Raven, I believe in you." I'm like, "What, you too?" I wanted to be free from this pressure, from this commitment of the character. But then I got a download. That's like one of my favorite things to say when I have received some sort of wisdom or some sort of thought, feeling, or some form of energy from either myself, the creator, or our ancestors. And it said, "Raven, I believe in you." And it sounded like my own voice. So then I began to research, which is one of the great things that I'm really good at. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Lenny Kravitz, Lisa Bonet, Bob Marley, and my all-time favorite, Sade. All Black individuals with a Caucasian mother or father. I figured it out. It was fear. 10 years before my senior year, in 2009, I was a little girl raised by my mother and grandfather in a 3-bedroom brick house on Keswick Avenue in Southside Richmond. I remember going to 2 schools, Oak Grove and then Broad Rock Elementary. I don't remember much of those times except a few that always have left an imprint on my being. 1, girls would try to cut my hair when I was not looking. And 2, kids tease me and call me names like peanut butter. Come on now. There's a fear in the imprint, and it stuck with me, attaching itself to my code, waiting to surface and hinder me from every challenge that I ever faced. Going back to the high school drama club, I had an epiphany after the conversations that I had with my English teacher, my mother, and myself. I feared who I was, and I was intimidated by what I could do. The possibilities of being greater than myself, my present self, scared me to my core. I realized I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know what my purpose was. Practicing for that play brought a side out of me that I never knew that I had, and revealed a version of Raven that I began to love and I enjoy till this day. Confidently, I can say that I am very brave, I'm very resilient, I'm very accountable, and I love helping people. I accepted a challenge to play a character that wasn't benevolent, but that character played a key role. I overcame my own revelations during my practice, remembering my own struggles as a growing adolescent, and it helped me to tap into Bo Willie's character, even more to where I played the role during our drama contest at Godwin High School, facing all of the schools in the county. And I left that stage with an award for Best Supporting Actress. While I was grateful for the award and recognition, for the first time ever, I truly felt purpose. My purpose was to figure out who I am, what I am, my passions, my dislikes, etc. Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Lenny Kravitz, Lisa Bonet, Bob Marley, and my all-time favorite, Sade. All Black individuals with a Caucasian mother or father. But what about my Native American roots? I don't like to admit it, but I do know, I don't know much about being Native American. I'm a mixed girl from one of the hardest parts of the Richmond area. And any state identification card that I've ever known has always had B for Black under the race category. My grandfather wasn't able to teach me, my mother, my brother, about our roots of the Upper Mattaponi Indian tribe. Sadly, while in grade school, my peers and I did not learn much about Native Americans either, except the journey of Lewis and Clark, Pocahontas' novel of romance, and a few stories of war, some agriculture, but that's about it. Not growing up in Indian country, or at least being part of it, used to give me the feeling of being an outsider. I would feel left out in conversations with my peers, or even feel intimidated by others that I know that have always owned their role in Indigenous American Indian heritage. Working for VTEC since 2020 has opened my eyes and heart to connect with my Indigenous heritage, and it has helped me strengthen those quirks of bravery, resilience, accountability, and Indigenous community outreach. That's why this conference is very dear to me and the hearts of us, including my peers. So, I want to welcome all of you to the Preserving Our Legacy Through Education Conference in September 2023. On behalf of Virginia Tribal Education Consortium, we want to thank each and every one of you for participating in this event. A special thanks is given to our tribal leaders, as well as their staff, our tribal leaders of the 7 federally recognized Indian tribes of Virginia. We are gracious and filled with such excitement to have the true leaders of Virginia's first people for Chiefs Panel Day here at this conference. We pay tribute to all of you and thank you for your efforts in continuing to strengthen our communities, adding bravery, resilience, and accountability. I want to also thank our tribal citizens, our keynote speakers, and our partners for joining us today as well. You all are also helping to maintain and enhance our mission to better the education and career paths of our tribal communities. For Chiefs Panel Day, we will all be witness to our great leaders discuss the heritage, history, culture, and contemporary lifeways of Virginia natives, including the wrongful doctrines, laws, and agreements that have impacted our citizens tremendously, and how we can continue to overcome those barriers. You will also hear about topics discussing the forward journey of Native peoples, recruitment and encouragement of accurate Virginia Indian educational works for Native and non-Native filled classrooms, and Senecomica. In between, we have breakout sessions planned for everybody, where you will participate in viewing, or have the option at least, I'm not forcing anybody now, you can actually view the Virginia's Museum of History and Culture's film called Imagine Virginia, which is upstairs in that balcony area. And you will also be able to visit the conference rooms, Lacey, Bird, and Reynolds for workshops that are presented by our project directors and their staff. I welcome VTEC's Chairperson Dr. Mayflower Edwards, citizen of the Chickahominy tribe, to the podium. And again, my hopes for you all today, and myself as well, is that we all walk out of this conference day with more connections, more knowledge, and more life. I leave you all with grand wishes, lots of lights, and radiant vibes.
Thank you, Raven, so much. You did a wonderful job. I would also like to say welcome to everybody. I would also like to say thank you to our executive board. So if anybody from the executive board, would you stand up? There you go. And from our board, if you could stand up. There you go. I would like to say thank you for the people that are standing. We are all volunteers. Everything we do is for the passion and the heart, from our heart that we do this. And I just want to say thank you for everything that you do. And I'd like to say thank you to all of the chiefs for being here today. So I'm going to start with Chief Ann Richardson. I'm going to introduce each one here. We have Chief Ann Richardson from the Rappahannock tribe. Next we have Chief Diane Shields from the Monacan tribe. If you notice, we have 2 female chiefs. Let me point that out. That's right. Next, we have Miss Jessica Stewart. She's sitting in for the Chickahominy tribe. Unfortunately, Chief Adkins is ill today, so we have Miss Jessica Stewart sitting in. Fabulous, fabulous person. Next, we have Chief Frank Adams from Upper Monacan. Then we have Chief Robert Gray from the Pamunkey. Next, we have Chief Jerry Stewart
from the eastern Chickahominy, and then all the way on the end is Chief Keith Anderson from the Nasman tribe. So these are all of our 7 federally recognized. So our topic of conversation today for our panel is quite diverse, but is very important as well. We're going to be discussing the U.S. Constitution, House Concurrent Resolution 331. We're also going to discuss the physical genocide by the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We're also going to discuss Dr. Walter Plucker, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, which was the paper genocide of our people, Loving versus Virginia of 1967, and the General Assembly in 2001. All of this was significantly impacted the indigenous population here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'm so blessed that we have everybody here on the stage, because this impacted every single one of the people here on this stage. So they can talk to this from a personal standpoint. The Founding Fathers witnessed how our people lived, of the people, for the people, and by the people. And as such, they framed the United States of America Constitution based on our democratic principles. Tribes were expressly mentioned once in the United States Constitution, and individually Indians are mentioned twice. We are the only race mentioned in the Constitution. The Confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the political system developed by our people, as were many of the democratic principles that were incorporated in the Constitution itself. Congress gave recognition to our Native ancestors' contribution to the framing of the Constitution and House Concurrent Resolution 331. This is significant from legislation because a concurrent resolution are taken up simultaneously by both the House and the Senate and must be passed by both chambers of Congress. None of this is taught in the U.S. history class or book. And if I polled this auditorium, I would probably say 98% of you had no idea about what I just stated. One must ask why. Why is this not taught in any history book? In 1607, it was our shores that the foreigners landed on what we refer to as Mother Earth, or as a continent, Turtle Island. It was our ancestors who educated the foreigners. We did not name this continent America or give ourselves the racial and identity as Native American or indigenous people. These were stigmas forced upon us. So as a panel, why do you believe our people's contributions to the United States have been neglected from the history of America and the world stage?
You can go first.
So, my opinion of this is that it's typical of the conqueror, not just here in the United States, but in other parts of the world. And so, the conqueror gets to tell the story because they have the power. And our story was not written down by historians that were running around with us. We had oral tradition of our history, and there was no documentation that was, how we say, verified by some authority in this colonial Virginia area when they came. And so what we consequently have here is most of the colonial records, the narratives, ship's logs, trading, commerce, and some diplomacy among the tribes, notes on those kinds of things. And so we have just, recently began to recognize as a scholarship the oral history of tribes. Those things, for my particular tribe, our oral history has been proven by archaeologists and also historians. And it's very gratifying for us because I can remember as a young girl, people coming into our community, scholars, studying us. And my dad would tell them stories and they would, relegate that to wives' tales. And it was only until, recent years that we finally found historians and scholars and archaeologists that would come in and listen to the real story of the history of the tribe and go forth to verify that history. So I think that's primarily the reason why specifically the Virginia tribes and East Coast tribes have been relegated to non-existent by colonial powers. And those powers and that colonial thinking has been the standard for government and for society for a long time.
I have to agree with everything that Ann said. I also, during all the research that we had to do for our federal recognition, I realized that our people, all of our people did one treaty in 1677 with England, and that established the Mattaponi and Pamunkey reservations. And this country did support that at the beginning. But I believe why we were pushed out of history is because they needed our lands. They needed our knowledge to begin with, but after they had that, they didn't want to share with us after that time frame. So we got pushed out. Like everybody says, the Trail of Tears. Everybody knows relatives that probably were on the Trail of Tears. Fortunately, our people, we lived in the woodland areas and in the mountains, so we stayed pretty close to that. Thank you.
I agree with the other two ladies here on the stage, and I do appreciate both of you. Again, this was kind of put upon me this morning. I just want to thank you both for paving the way for individuals like myself for things that I can aspire to. So thank you for that. So why do you believe our people's contributions to the United States have been neglected from the history of America? I believe the answer is fear. Fear of what we are capable of, fear of the truth to be told, of coming over here on the basis of religious freedoms, yet all the bloodshed that was taking place on Turtle Island to achieve their agenda. And so, we've always had the power. It's within us, and it's time that this true story is told and that we correct the history that has been neglected from these history books. And like Raven so eloquently said with, her story from the welcome this morning of fear, it's what permeates this right now with colonialism. So, in my opinion, I believe we need to rise above that, and we need to change the narrative of how we want the next 7 generations to understand our history from our school books.
This is just like I thought. The chief's panel going to agree with everyone because we all know our history. But I wrote some notes yesterday as I was thinking about this, and I thought it's pretty simple. After the Constitution was written and ratified, the white government felt like they were the great race of people. The tribes, in an attempt to maintain their heritage and culture, were labeled redskins, savages, only good Indian is a dead Indian. The United States government wanted us to talk, dress, act, and think like them. We resisted that. We we were our own people, we had our own culture. And that caused a lot of friction in the brand new United States government. But by resisting, we were just deemed as savages or stupid or whatnot. You know, our ability to read and write, and even speak the English language, we didn't know. We were learning the English language. They wanted us to speak English language, but our parents and our forefathers wanted us to maintain our culture, maintain our language. And now, on the East Coast, I know we're all struggling to revise our language, to rediscover our language, because it means a lot to us. But at the end of the day, after the Constitution, the tribes were easy target for the greedy. It's about the land. It's about the good land. I mean, the Trail of Tears, when they moved so many Indians off the East Coast, they didn't tell them, we're going to send you to the Garden of Eden. It's got utopia over there. They didn't say that. They picked out the worst piece of land that they could, and that's where they planted all those folks, the ones that survived the trip. And it was terrible. But in my travels and whatnot, as being leader of the Upper Mackinac people, I found that people in other countries show us more respect than our own government does. And as I close, I want to tell you, I believe that foreigners that come to visit the United States, come to attend powwows and whatnot, foreigners know more about Virginia history and Virginia Indians than Virginians.
Good morning. I'm going to go back and use the term conquerors, and I definitely agree. I'm going to answer the question, I guess, based from the aspect of schools and such. I kind of see it as two issues that come together. One is limited time, a whole lot of history to cover, and the conquerors just have an inherent bias. The predominant culture was setting the tone of schoolwork, what was studied and such. And I think going forward, we have the opportunity with organizations such as VTEC and all to change that narrative, and I look forward to that.
I think the biggest problem for our country today is that we're still here. They've done everything they could. You know, they destroyed birth certificates, wrote the history books one-sided, and yet we survived. Might be a little battered and torn, but we survived. We had our own schools. We were bused across county lines, and no one complained back then. But we weren't even recognized as human beings. I remember looking at, like, my grandparents' birth certificates and all back in the 1800s, and they scratched through the race, undetermined, or they changed it from Indian to colored. But when we received federal recognition, we had to go back. Well, this country didn't start in 1607. We were here thousands of years before that. But when you talk about prejudice, and I'm not bitter about it, what other race has to prove who they are? I don't know of any race that has to go through what we went through to prove that your ancestors were the first inhabitants of this country. So it continues to go on, but once again, I think the biggest problem is that we're still here, and that's hard for people to accept.
First of all, thank you, all attendees, for your sentiments and thoughts, and definitely my sentiments resonate with Chief Adams and Chief Stewart. And from documentation in terms of conversations, the Europeans really never considered us as equals. We were considered as a subspecies A lot of that had to do with their own stereotypes about the way we looked, the way we adorn ourselves, our traditions, religions, and those type of things. So anyone who really has a level or mindset of superiority would treat any race of that nature. And we know that by the demographic and the way persons of color around the world have been treated. And even to this day, some of our biggest conflicts are wanting to and desiring to have a seat at the table for things that, especially with consultations, things that we have the innate right as sovereign nations to be a part of. And so that same discrimination and stereotypes and dismissal is still going on today, and it's an ongoing fight. Thank you.
Thank you. At the end, everyone will have an opportunity to ask any questions to the panel, so think through the questions that you might have. I do want to touch on what Chief Stewart said. You're absolutely correct. We are the only race that has to prove who we are, and we have a tribal card. We are actually issued a card that identifies who we are with our race. There is no other race that has that. Everyone has a driver's license, but that's diversity. You don't have Caucasian people walking around with a Caucasian card saying, I am Caucasian, I'm white. You don't have African Americans walking around with a card that says, I'm black. We have a tribal card that has our name, our identifiable information on it, with citizen we are from a tribe that says we are Native American Indian. So Chief Stewart, thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention. And I wanted to touch on what Chief Anderson said, which is very important, the way we look. Everyone has an image in their head of what a Native American Indian is supposed to look, because it comes from TV and the movies. We're not all dark hair, dark skin. We all look different. So I wanted to touch on that. The other thing I wanted to touch on is that when our chiefs finally got our federal recognition, which they fought so hard for, it gave us sovereignty and self-determination. And with that, our chiefs became presidents. I want to give you the equivalence of what they are. They are sovereign nations. We are a sovereign nation within the United States of America. Think about that. A sovereign nation inside the United States of America. Being a sovereign nation means that our chiefs are equivalent to the President of the United States of America. And our people treat them as such. Then a second chief, or if you have an assistant chief, is equivalent to the vice president. That is how our succession is in our tribes. We honor our chiefs. We respect our chiefs. So I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to go to something many of you have touched on. Within the Commonwealth, Indigenous heritage, culture, and history, it all eluded the educational system, from the physical genocide, which was the Trail of Tears that you mentioned, Chief Shields, by the Indian Removal Act of 1830, by the United States of America. All of you touched on that. But then we had the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, and that brought on the paper genocide by the notorious Dr. Walter Plecker, and that was here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Dr. Richardson, I would like to thank you for bringing the panels that are outside as you walk into where the cafeteria is that we're going to serve the food. But I want to make the note here in modern times to what has happened to our people. These acts would be violations of the UN Charter Article 1.2. That's the United Nations Article 1.2. Our tribal communities were referred to offensively as other, stripped of our identity, and eradicated from the Census Bureau by Dr. Plucker. The Racial Integrity Act remained on the books until 1967, when the U.S. Supreme Court in Loving versus Virginia found its prohibition of interracial marriage to be unconstitutional. And in 2001, the Virginia Assembly denounced the act as racist. The United States attempted to eradicate us, all of us, by physical genocide. Everyone is familiar with what occurred with Hitler and that genocide. The whole world knows. Our genocide was more significant. We lost more people. It was double the digits than what Hitler did. It was astronomical, to put it at the least. And that was through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. It is an Indian Removal Act. That means they killed us. They were trying to remove us. It made it virtually impossible for any Eastern tribe to escape the succeeding of the land and moving to Indian Territory west of the Mississippi River. That is where they stole our land. They took it all and they tried to either eradicate us or push us all the way through. However, we in the Commonwealth refused to leave our homeland because we knew the terrain. And while we may have been displaced, we survived and we thrived here in the Commonwealth because we knew our terrain. The newfound government that had modeled its democratic principles in 1607 based on our people had now in 1830 chosen not to ignore how we had educated them, but rather were in fear of what our culture and society would become. And what one fears is what they try to hide, eliminate, or eradicate, just as you said, Ms. Stewart. So the specific statement out of the UN Charter 1.2 specifically states, this is what it says: equal rights and self-determination of peoples establishes that one of the main purposes of the United Nations, and thus the Security Council, is to develop friendly international relations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. By violating this, it was an act of war. An act of war. Which means every other country in the world would have come to defend us because the United States had violated the UN article as an act of war. Based on this, what perspective do you have as a chief of your tribal people now, knowing or being aware that the United States of America violated the UN Charter Article 1.2 against each of your tribes or tribal nations within your own homeland? And how would you have perceived your ancestral tribal chiefs would have felt had they known? Let's stop. You want to start this way or the opposite way? Okay.
I'd like to go back for a moment and, thank you for that. I'd like to go back for a moment to where you spoke about our sovereignty and our federal recognition in 2018. So what that bill actually did, we had pre-colonial treaties with foreign nations on Virginia land. And that was a part of international treaty law. And treaty law today remains the law of the land. And so the sovereignty that we have always had, we didn't get in 2018. We've always had that, and other foreign governments have recognized that other than the United States. So that sovereignty was inherent in our tribes here. Otherwise, we would not have been parties to international treaties. Those treaties were recognized in our U.S. Constitution and continues today to be our sovereign rights as tribal nations. Although we occupy lands in the Commonwealth of Virginia, those lands now have the ability to be put into, which really started here, trust with state reservations, the state reservations that were here in the 1677 treaty that allocated lands for all the tribes on the stage and others for reservations. And so that's the basis of our sovereignty. And what happened in 2018 and 16 for the tribes here was an affirmation of the United States government of that sovereignty. And so that's where we are today as tribal governments. What has happened here that is important for us to understand, what has happened here for the last 400 and some years with these tribes. I think it was Chief Stewart that said, and it's still happening. And it's still happening to Indigenous people all over the world. One of the recent pieces of news that's come out was about a planned fire in Maui to eradicate the Indigenous people who are part of the Hawaiian Homeland Association, where their lands were reserved for those tribal families, and now developers are coming in and buying up that, and it was all a plot. I have family there. It was all a plot to get the land away from the Indigenous people again. And so, you know, this stuff doesn't stop. It keeps right on going. And the fact that we are still here is a testament to our people, our way of life, our way of thinking. And as I told someone in a meeting last week, tribal culture is about survival. Survival is woven into every part of who we are, because that's how we had to live. And we've had to live that way for thousands of years. And we're pretty good at it by now. And that's why we are here today with the sovereign status that we should always have had here in the United States, and Congress now acknowledges. What has happened to us has violated many laws. Not only international laws, but our own federal government laws. What we deal with today is still in violation of that. When our tribe left our strongholds of village life and were marched into the reservation that we currently have, our territory, we did the same thing there that we had done on many of the towns that we lived in in colonial period. Lands that were taken. And as we were thinking about the education piece, I reached out to Hope Richardson last night to talk to me about a historical marker that she had done, because her mother was our treasurer for 50 years, Dorothy Richardson, and she was a teacher as a young woman in our community. And she had the history of our tribal schools. And one of the things I realized is that the tribes had their own schools on their own tribal lands, primarily owned by a tribal member, and they would donate the land and the tribe would build the school. And I realized that Chickahominy, Upper Mattaponi, and their Nansemen all had to buy their lands back. You had to buy your lands back, the Monacans, to buy our lands back because the counties where these schools were stole those lands and those buildings. And that didn't happen in 1607 or in 1705. That happened in the 50s and the 60s. This is contemporary history, people. So you scholars out there, this is a great project for you to get on. And those lands were never returned to the tribes. The tribes had to buy those lands back. Now, what law does that violate? I'm just saying, as we dig into the history of these tribes, not only our prehistory and colonial history, but our contemporary history of how we have been treated by the state of Virginia, really requires a lot of attention, because this has happened in so many different areas. We're here talking about education and why no one knows this story. Well, because nobody wants you to know the story. Because the colonial mentality that permeates here does not want the story to be told. I remember in 2007 when we were having all of the celebrations about the history and the founding of Virginia. There was very much a fear on the part of the state that the true history of the tribes would come out. And so this is not just something that's happened in the past. This is an ongoing issue that we have in the state. And while we are working better with the state now than we ever have before, there are still many, many issues that need to be resolved, like taxation and the various things that impugn our sovereignty as tribal nations. So I just wanted to say those things.
No, that's excellent.
Thank you, Ann. I want to talk just a bit about the racial integrity law and how it affected all of our people, not just my tribe, but all of our tribes. That was created in 1924 by Walter Klecker, as you said. And what he did was he created what we call the hit list. He labeled all of our people's last names on these documents and sent them to registrar's offices and to hospitals and to schools and anywhere else that they thought that Indian people would visit or be there. So our people couldn't be registered or in the census by who they were. The registrars were threatened if they registered us as Indian people, they would lose their jobs. So it wasn't until like 1930 census, because I've done the research, that our people were listed as Indian people. The registrar stood up for us and put that designation in. And I've worked with many of our people to get their birth certificates corrected. They've been labeled as mulatto, mixed, issue, or other, that's also. And it's a horrid thing for anybody to be told you are something you're not. We have a whole generation that went to our log cabin schoolhouse because we weren't allowed in the public schools until 1964. And all of that is due to this country. As I said, I worked with the birth certificates, and finally, and I believe it was Governor Allen, that we petitioned because we were having so much trouble getting the Department of Vital Records to help us correct our birth certificates. He issued a law in the state of Virginia that we could get our birth certificates corrected free, because before that you had to pay, of course. But even at that time, working with the Department of Vital Records, each person had to prove their lineage. I worked with them to get their parents' birth records or marriage records or death records, and to use church records or anything that I could to document who they were. This was a struggle for our people, but you know what? It pulled them together. They are really strong, motivated people today.
Thank you. Going back to the question, I am, not speaking as a chief, I'm just speaking as a tribal citizen. And like Chief Richardson said, growing up, I've always known we've had our sovereignty. That didn't have to be awarded to us in any way, shape, or form. But I wish you could see my notes over here as you were talking. I had written earlier contemporary history. This is what we're dealing with right here, right now. And in my personal experience, just a little background, I come from the education world. I was 9 years in the classroom as an elementary teacher, and in my school building, it's a very large population of students, 700, I was the only teacher of color in the building. And so sometimes when that happens, they look at you as the default of, okay, you can handle this or you can handle that. No, I'm not going to do that because I'm going to educate you so you can handle it as well. And so a lot of this contemporary history I presented to my students, which was not on the standards of learning whatsoever. At 10 and 11 years old, they can handle the ugly truth. And to have 10 and 11-year-olds look at you and say, that's messed up. It is messed up. This is contemporary history. I'm speaking about my grandmother, my grandfather, who were, still here, and the struggles that they had with education and things like that. So it was very hard to, teach that to students when, this isn't scripted in any way, shape, or form. And how do I help the other teachers in my building to understand this? And then even taking it back a step further, going through my college years here in urban Richmond at VCU, and being in a class where a professor said blatantly, and this is why there are no Native Americans in Virginia. And literally the entire class looked at me like, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna say? I had to take a breather, but then I came back with a lot of information. And it's amazing how things come full circle, because this past semester I was asked to go and speak to several VCU classes on diversity in education and this, that, and the other. And I was in a class, it was about this size or larger, and I asked the students present, I said, if you went to school in the Commonwealth of Virginia, please raise your hand if you learned anything about Virginia Indians from your social studies classes or whatever. And there was nothing. It was very sad. And everyone looked around like, wow, I'm from Northern Virginia, I'm from this area or whatever. And the ones that did know, it was because of their close proximity to a tribe, not necessarily from the school and whatsoever. So, how do we, again, going back to what I said earlier, how do we change that narrative? And why are we still having this conversation? I feel like we're talking in circles. As a young girl, I thought, we would have made so many strides by now, but, here we are still proving ourselves, you know, and having to explain ourselves to this, that, or this person or whatever. So, you know, again, I'm speaking to myself. What am I going to do to change this? What am I doing? So I just thank you all for being here to hear all that. And if you have any ideas on what we can do, like Chief Richardson said, we do have a better relationship with the state right now. You know, establishing more contacts within the Department of Education. You know, why aren't we there right now? We need to be there. So I know that did not answer the question at all, Dr. Edwards. But if one thing I did want to speak to when you said, what is your perspective knowing that they violated the United Nations Charter, Article 1.2, which I did learn about, you know, in my global studies class at UCU, is, you know, they had no trust in us, they had no respect for us, they continue to show their lack of respect and trust with us, which is why we are in this position now where we are having difficulties trusting them with our land into trust issues, you know? Such an irony. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Edwards said that violating that was an act of war. And I agree. But I also know that our forefathers were at war. And we're still at war. In trying to improve the life and health and welfare of our tribal citizens in Virginia. But I know the tribes are very resilient, facing disease, murder, removal, judicial inequities. You imagine the Indian going to court to sue a white man for stealing their land 100 years ago? How would that turn out? And then paper genocide. But I hear the word resilient all the time. Some of us survived it. But a lot of the tribes and native peoples lost all. I mean, this was the first contact state. There's a lot of tribes in this state. Now we're down to a few. As I look back on the prior leaders of my people, I try to think just how much they endured. Suffered as they watched their people get mistreated in so many ways. And right now, as I'm thinking about this, I can only honor them in my prayers and my dreams. And as leader of my tribe, keep fighting the fight to raise up the people. Unfortunately, the struggle for fair treatment is still very much an ongoing battle. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take it back to the original question. Perspective as a chief, now knowing the U.S. violated the UN Charter. I would say that our people were first mistreated by the Crown of England for over 100 years prior to the U.S. But a little nitpicking here, neither country, England or the U.S., violated the UN Charter because it didn't exist till 1945. If we were to say it violated the Charter, I'd have to go back to the beginning of civilization, say everything that happened all over the world prior to 1945 violated. But the issue would be that since the United States signed on to that UN Charter in 1945, and since that time, it has violated what it signed onto. And that is something the Virginia tribes and tribes all over the nation are continuing to deal with. And as far as ancestral tribal chiefs, I go back to what Chief Adams said. Yeah, we're at war. It was just straight war, kind of outside. As he said, we're still at war fighting for our rights. And I look forward to the day where we no longer have to fight. We're just accepted as we are, as part of this nation.
Once again, I think the problem is that we're still here, but the government's willing to give us some land. You know, if you'll take the land, there's a couple three-legged yellow-breast whippersnappers on there. And you take 1,000 acres and make sure nothing happens to them, but that's all you can use that land for. Now, that's an exaggeration, but they give us the land, we're going to give it to you, it's yours, but here's how you have to use it. And the environment is precious to all of us, I know that. But I think it's still maybe a way of, they don't want us to build on it. You know, maybe too many people coming back to Virginia. It's probably like, I'm a Southern Baptist minister. We had missionaries in Africa. They want a lot of people to the Lord. And one of the boys wanted to come back and see the people that had that had taught him about this Jesus who loves everyone. But when he went into the meeting of the Baptists, he had to dine separately. There were no religions for black children. That's a black eye to the Southern Baptist Convention. But I think the United States is much like that. They're making a lot of noise, but there's still no room for us at the table. I think about my dad, and he went in World War II. They told him there was only 2 races in the state of Virginia, black or white. A name I haven't heard, and many of you know Dr. Roundtree, but her grandfather was head of the draft board. And when they tried to draft my dad with no race, he went to visit him, and he wasn't home. Maybe it was the reason that my dad had a shotgun in a pocket full of shells. But his approach to it is, I'm going over there to fight people that haven't done anything to me. I might as well get one before I go. But that was settled. I thought it was an exaggeration. My grandmother said it wasn't. She said, your dad almost killed me with worry, some of the things he did. But to go in to fight for freedom for everyone and not even be recognized as a human being. And yet so many of our people did that in other wars. I'm not bitter about it, but let's just tell the truth about it. That this country, they said it was a Christian nation, founded on Christian principles. It's never been that way. If you were Indian, you didn't count. If you were black, you didn't count. And there's been a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes will still remain in history, but we can move forward. There's been, I don't know of any other group that's been discriminated against like we have, not in this country. I feel that the United States government owes us for the things that they've done, not you personally, but things were sure changed. You know, we had to speak English, or in many cases you were killed. But they're making it better. Look at all these billions we're sending to foreign countries now because people are trying to go in there and take over. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Right now we have billions in that budget to help other countries. And yet, very little done for those that were here when the English first came.
Again, thank you all the chiefs, for all your enlightening words and your stories. You know, as I was sitting here, I reflected on a very traumatic day. I never forget, it was the first week in 3rd grade, and they actually had, I remember having a race census that was conducted by my teacher. And the census consisted of noting, all black boys, please raise your hands. Same thing went down the line for black girls, and white boys. And as the teacher did the census, she was off one. And I was in the back of the class. I know I didn't raise my hand. She did it again, and all the students pointed at me. Chief didn't raise his hand. And I did not know what to say. I said, I'm not black, I'm not white. Well, and the teacher just said, well, we don't have no other notation for another race. I'll put you down as what I think you are. And I still remember that to this day. And I finally, as well, think of my father, who would have been 78 in a couple of weeks. In addition to the discrimination we had in the state to go to college, besides Bacon and Cherokee, one of the only other options was for natives to go to HBCUs. And my father attended Virginia University with his 3 other sisters, and from that, he played in all 3 professional world football leagues, the NFL, the WFL, and the Canadian Football League. And he desperately wanted to finish his senior year at Union, but due to the ongoing racism, threats, and my father was twice as big as me, he felt that he could not even live as a person in the state of Virginia. And so becoming a professional football player and moving to New York as a way to survive and to live as a human being. So the path that he and my mother have trod has given me the determination and resilience to fight through that. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as all of you have heard, if the physical genocide was not bad enough, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 was soon to follow, capitalized by the notorious Dr. Walter Plecker. Dr. Plecker was a physician and the first Virginia State Register of Vital Statistics, a position he served in from 1912 to 1946. Employing Virginia's Act to preserve racial integrity, Plecker effectively separated Virginia citizens to simplify racial categories, white and colored. The law, which remained in effect until 1967, when the United States Supreme Court overturned it in the case of Loving versus Virginia, which required a racial description of every person to be reported at birth, asserting the Virginia Indians were in fact mixed-blood Negroes. Plecker also pressured state agencies into reclassifying Indians as colored. The policy legacy was effectively to erase Indians as an identity and made it difficult for Virginia Indians to gain state and federal recognition. In that court case, it specifically, this is exactly what was stated in that case. This is exactly what that judge stated. In his opinion, Almighty God created races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriage. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix. That in itself is an oxymoron. Because basically he is saying that there are separate continents for which each race should remain on that continent. We were already here on this continent. Other races came here, which means they intermixed here. We did not do it. It's amazing, once again, what the government does. But because of that, Indians were forced to attend black schools, whose substandard quality in the U.S. Supreme Court recognized years later in the Brown versus Board of Education, a decision that desegregated public education, as we all are aware of that. The Racial Integrity Act of 1924, that legislation, it actually prevented whites from marrying non-whites, and it explicitly defined those racial classifications, which I just said. And Chief Shields, you are correct. In 1997, it was Governor Allen that simplified the process of correcting the birth certificates that Plecker's legacy destroyed our people by that paper of genocide. And Chief Miles from the Monacan tribe at that time, he was quoted with, "He came very close to committing statistical genocide on Native Americans in Virginia." That was his quote at the time. So the open panel question is, can you give us the experiences of your families or your opinions or how you feel about what Dr. Plecker has done to the Commonwealth of Virginia and how the paper genocide has destroyed the natives here in the Commonwealth?
Well, it was a tumultuous time for the tribes here in Virginia when Plecker started his work. We issued our own birth certificates because we had our own midwives. And so my grandmother issued our own birth certificates because of what was happening. So tribes went insular, and they insulated themselves against this new concept to erase their identity. And they developed many mechanisms for protecting their tribes against that. And one of the things that it obviously did was it caused a lot of the tribes to come together. We were like firefighters, and we gathered together and fight like hell for our identity. And that's what was happening during that time. And then we had to deal with the whole diaspora of people, leaving, and so that they could remain Indian and get education. So that was all happening around that same time, which, the law, I'm sure, pushed many people out that would not have gone away from their communities. Our tribe made a conscientious decision at that time as to the families that would leave and go to these locations that we created, other kind of tribal villages in these urban towns, and where these families could live together kind of like we had always lived. And they would get jobs. That was the strategy. They would get jobs, and they would send money back to our tribe to pay the attorneys here in Richmond that were fighting for our identity. It was a brilliant strategy. It worked. And as a result, Walter Plecker created his hit list, which we utilized in both our state and our federal recognition. And so even though Plecker was a fanatical racist and eugenicist, that incidentally was grounded here in Virginia, in Richmond, and at UVA, the Anglo-Saxon clubs of America. was operated from UVA in the highest levels and sanctioned by our General Assembly here in Virginia and state government. So that's that. And then how it has affected tribes, it's still affecting tribes. So we had members of our tribe who during the war went to jail. It was a federal court case. They refused to go in other than Indian. They refused to serve. And as a result, they went to court, federal court. They were prosecuted and sentenced. 3 of our war heroes. And that was just one of the things. It was a major case for us, but it was just one of the impacts that it had. There was so much momentum that had been gathered from the Indian Rights Association in Philadelphia and other organizations, some in Virginia, actually educational institutions who came on board to support the tribe because they knew that this was wrong, that they ended up sending these men away to the New England states because of fear that the racial integrity law would be overturned in that time period. And so they made them conscientious objectors and they sent them away to make all of the hoopla go away. So it has affected the tribes from that point. Other tribal members did go to jail as well in court cases in other tribes, to make sure that we're AKC registered, and it's affected the society around us, and it allowed people around us to determine who we were without ever asking or knowing. It gave counties the right to come in and take our land and do what they want with our things, even though it didn't belong to them. And so it really opened up a door for many, many atrocities that the tribes have had to fight in the war that the chiefs were talking about that really never stopped for the Virginia tribes.
I agree with everything Anna said. The racial integrity law was a difficult time for our people. Personally, I've talked to several of our older people and how that made them feel within themselves because they had to work in an outside society that told them they were something that they weren't. We were fortunate enough to have our Indian Mission School, which was started in 1868. And of course, we used it till 1964 for once we were allowed in public schools. But how my great-grandfather, he had to leave the state of Virginia, and this was for World War I, so he could register as an Indian person. And he went to Maryland, and he did that, and then he went into service. And Anne was right. A lot of our people weren't able to get jobs to support their families. The major job for our people were orchard workers, but a lot of them tried to get work and couldn't because of their classifications. So we had people that moved to Maryland, and they all stayed within the same area to support each other. We also had people that went to Tennessee to support each other. And in my own family, my grandparents married here in Virginia, and their marriage record says they were colored. They lived here in Virginia and had 3 children born at home by midwives, and those 3 children were Indian children. And once they left Virginia, so grandfather could get a better job, all the rest of the children were born as white. So that just tells you we got labeled by what people saw in us, not who we were, but what we looked like.
I bring a little, I guess, a different perspective to the Racial Integrity Act. The trauma associated with it, you know, with my generation. You know, having 3 of my grandparents still alive to this day, which is truly a blessing, and to hear some of the difficult stories they've told of going to get married in other places for the marriage certificates, those that were born in a hospital versus those born at home, and what their birth certificates look like. And then hearing stories of my grandmother going to school in Bacone. And just a little tidbit, she is Chief Steve's sister, so just think about that type of personality. She made a lot of good trouble, and I love to hear those stories of her making that good trouble of maintaining her identity. And I am just so blessed to know that I stand on the shoulders of these giants who fought the good fight of maintaining their identity for my generation, and what I can do to continue that legacy. So that's the perspective I bring on the Racial Integrity Act.
Okay, Dr. Edwards, thank you for bringing this up and giving me a heads up so I could think about it yesterday. You gave me a whole day to think about this. But maybe it's a conspiracy theory, I'm thinking. But Walter Plecker was the first Virginia State Registrar. Didn't even have one before him. There wasn't a state registrar. Why did the governor and the General Assembly create at that time? I feel like it was for a reason. But I have no direct experience with Walter Plecker. I'm old, but I'm not that old. But I hated him all my life. I've heard talk of him, none of it ever good. My grandparents and my mother, they were God-fearing women. They taught me to hate him. And my grandparents lived through the whole entire Plucker era. And I've seen the papers that my grandparents had to get letters from white landowners in King William County swearing that they were legit, they were real Indians. But the thing in my conspiracy theory is, I just want everybody to remember that Walter Plecker was an employee of the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. Therefore, his actions had the blessings of the governor and the General Assembly for 34 years. That's 8 different governors, if my math is right. So it was not just him. It was the government of the state that did this. He was just the one holding the smoking gun. But one little tidbit that I'll always remember is I don't know if everybody knows this, but Walter Plecker got ran over by either a car or a bus in Richmond. And my grandmother told me, and it was a long time ago, so news traveled slowly, but when it got to King William County, it got to the Upper Mattapony community, we didn't have streets, but we had dancing. And they celebrated the death of Walter Plecker they were just so happy that that evil person was gone out of their life.
I'm going to take Plecker, what he did in 1924. Let's go 100 years earlier than that. The Monkey tribe had its reservation, and on 2 different occasions, our local white neighbors petitioned the General Assembly to take away our reservation, claiming that we were no longer Indian. We were African American at this term, using today's terminology. Thankfully, the General Assembly resisted. We fought that. But I'm going to add a different perspective. We were at threat, our cultural identity, our reservation and such. Unfortunately, we had to look out after ourselves. And what that did is it started turning our tribe against African Americans, primarily because we had to differentiate ourselves in order to maintain that identity. We basically had to go along with the predominant culture's definition. We rolled into the Civil War. Individual Pamunkey citizens were hiding runaway slaves. That's been evidenced by wanted signs for runaway slaves saying may be found on the Pamunkey Reservation. Then we get into the 70s, the Jim Crow laws that were being applied primarily against African Americans, but they were also being applied to Native Americans. Richmond newspaper had articles, we used to ride the train from King William County into Richmond, and they were telling us we had to ride in the last car, and we fought that. So I'm just bringing this up because it's an unfortunate part of our history that in order to avoid suicide on ourselves, in today's world, yeah, we should have been looking out for the African American plight, slavery and such, but we have to look inward and protect our own culture. And that's something that we look back on now and wish it hadn't been that way. When we get up to the Racial Integrity Act, this is where it starts affecting me personally. My grandparents joined many Pamunkey Indians leaving the state, moved up to Philadelphia. It was not a good place. Virginia was not a good place for Indians to live. So at that point, my grandparents moved up there. My mother was born there. My mother met a nice Irish boy up in Philadelphia. You got me here. So, but that's just a little bit of history, just how it affected us, for the last 200 years.
I think we've about covered Plecker and race problems. To put it in perspective, when Governor Allen signed in the law state recognition for us, I was 34 years old. When President Trump signed federal recognition, I was 69 years old. 35 years. I think the Racial Integrity Act had a lot to do with slowing things down. We were still living in the past. Once again, we're the only group that has to prove who we are. I don't know if I'm asking anyone else, are you full-blooded? And my answer is no, I'm not. Last week I gave a pint to the Red Cross.
Well, again, thank everyone this panel for your input and your sentiments. Again, just a few minutes ago, I shared my sentiments as far as what happened that I endured and my family, and I really don't want to revisit that. And I feel personally, today is a day to commemorate the specialness of today. Is to, even though Walter Plunkett was very definitely instrumental in the demise of the tribes, he has not destroyed anything. And right here in this room, we have reflections of great things have done and great persons. And I'm going to embarrass some people, but in our tribes, we have phenomenal young persons like Caleb Pollock, Jessica Stewart, the assortment of VTEC staff. My own son, Kalen Anderson, was awarded National Park Service Employee of the Year out of 25,000 people. In the back, we've got Ken Costello, who is a phenomenal advocate for our tribes and works as a tribal liaison for Dominican Energy. So again, whatever that Plunkett tried to do, all fell to pieces because again of our resiliency, our love of our people, our ties and our stewardship to this land. He did not destroy anything. Thank you.
Thank you. So in closing remarks, I want to thank everybody that's on the panel here, but I want to touch on the education piece as the closing remarks. The Pamunkey, it was difficult for us to go and get a higher education. So what happened is the Pamunkey, you sent some folks to Haskell Indian School in Kansas, okay? Not Virginia. You had to send them to Kansas. The Upper Mattapony, you had to send some to Michigan. You also sent 6 of them to Oak Hill Academy in West Virginia. Still not Virginia. I know personally my mom, Bertie Sowers, she was the first one from our shop, Chief Adkins, not the current one, the former one. She went to LMU. She did not want to go. She was afraid. She was scared. But she went. None of them were in Virginia. We had to go outside of Virginia to do that. In 1869, the Monacan were given a parcel. You built your own mission. And that's where you did. That was your Indian school. And the Rappahannock, you've been here for 11,000 years. 11,000 years. And this is still where we're at. So I want to thank everybody that has come. This is amazing. This is the first time in history that we've had all of you up here for a panel like this. So, does anybody have any closing remarks that they would like to say on the stage before we open it up to the floor? Okay.
Dr. Edwards talked about how the Chickahominy, we sent our students to Bacon in Oklahoma, and like I said, my grandmother was one of the individuals who attended. My other grandparents only went as far as the 7th grade. And so education's always been important for them, for their grandchildren. And they always said, you know, we will make a way for you all to go. And I'm very proud to say that not only myself, but my 2 siblings are all college graduates. And I think it's really because of, you know, their compassion and their drive for us. But what's important when I hear the stories of them going to Bacon College is they were given a one-way bus ticket. And I just can't imagine being a 17-year-old or 18-year-old individual, you know, growing up in a community and given a one-way bus ticket to another state to further your education. And not knowing if you're going to return and, you know, having a quick way to call home. And so that took a lot of courage, and I'm so glad that those elders in my tribe took that leap of faith to do that so we can be where we are today, even though it's probably not where they expected us to be, maybe a little further along, but I'm just so grateful that they took that leap of faith.
Dr. Adkins, I'd like to say, even though my parents and grandparents only had a couple of years of schooling at Sharon Indian School before they had to go work on the farm or do whatever. People might say they were uneducated, but they were really smart. They were smart enough to know that education was key to their children, their grandchildren growing up. So they pushed us all to go to school, even when schools, I went to Sharon Indian School, but then when it integrated, I had to go to the white school. There was 6 to 8 of us in high school when I started. And it was intimidating, but I remember coming home and I had a couple of A's and a bunch of C's on my report card. And my mom raised heck with me. I said, this is pretty good, Mom. It says right here, C is average. You are better than average. So I just want to say I support VTEC so much because I understand how important education is to our people. And appreciate all y'all are doing.
Dr. May, I just want to point out one thing for this panel, because I know this is going to be recorded and hopefully shown all over, that we neglected to talk about in Walter Plecker, was his connections to Hitler in Germany, and the Anglo-Saxon clubs of America, and their connection to the eugenics movement that really created the model. So the racial integrity law that was done here was really a model that was created here by Walter Plecker, that was utilized by Hitler in Germany, Poland, and other places against the Jewish population to eradicate them from the land as well. And I don't think people know that a lot. He was given all kinds of awards from the University of Heidelberg, and he was even referenced by the U.S. Census taker, the bureau chief of the U.S. Census, saying no one had any more genealogical data on, Hitler had no more genealogical data on his Jews than Walter Plecker had on his Virginia Indians. And so he always called us Indians. He just tried to make us something else. And I think it's important for people to know that, because as we talk about Virginia history, that's part of our history that no one wants to acknowledge. And I think it's time for that ugly truth to come out. Thank you.
Questions? So we'll open the floor to questions, and I'll be honest, I cannot see any of you because it's like dark. So I believe my staff had the microphone.
I have a question.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just gonna, I guess, ask the panel this. I don't know who to direct it to, but I understand, that part of the impetus for all of this is to better educate American students in classrooms here. And I really appreciate everything that you're all saying, but I wonder, we're talking about how we're at a point where things are getting better, but I also know that our current governor, his first proclamation was that we must not teach anything that might be construed as critical race theory, broadly defined or ambiguously defined, I think. But he has a mandate not to teach these very sort of things, these difficult topics in school. And I wonder how you address that, particularly as representatives of your tribes, and when you deal with this governor who has perhaps been responsive in some ways, but makes the very mandate of VTEC virtually impossible for so many teachers.
Well, I think that's part of the war that the chiefs were referencing. So our war never ended. We're still in war. And the critical race theory is formed as a part of the colonial mentality to eradicate stories that don't make everybody in the colonial world look good. So they don't want to know the ugly truth. And like we've done for thousands of years, we have strategized to be able to educate our people and the public in a way that is kind of under the radar of state control. And that's the way we've done it, always. And I'm sure it's a way that we will continue to fight that fight as well as many others in the future.
Yeah, I don't know if you call it a correction or clarification. I don't believe the governor is saying, don't teach the difficult things. A lot of it is what here, Florida, that's the big one in the country, don't teach to make children feel bad about their heritage. Now, I would agree with that. Don't work to make them feel bad, but if you present them facts and they feel bad about those facts, then too bad. It's just the way it is. And that's what, just teach the truth. And, but I would never agree to looking at a child and say, yeah, you should feel bad because you're white and what your ancestors did. But if they end up feeling bad that way, the facts, like I said, too bad.
So I also can say that our STEP grant is a building capacity grant, and that's one of the breakout rooms that you can go to. And in that grant, we actually do professional development with the teachers and provide them the correct historical, accurate information of the Indigenous people here in the Commonwealth. So we are providing that information, and it is going through the school systems. We also work with the Department of Education. We have a strong partnership with them. And we have worked with them on the SOLs. They actually have come to VTEC and asked us to review the SOLs so that they are accurate with the information that's in there. We also have a strong relationship with the governor's office, specifically the Secretary of Education and the deputy secretaries, the deputy governor. So we have strong partnerships in those areas, and we're working strong with them.
This is a short one for Chief Richardson. Did your grandmother's recording of births get recognized? Were they held on, like some births long ago were recorded in Bibles, and that people would pull out a Bible and say, there, I was born on this date, this is my name. Did your grandmother's recording get recognized for your family?
I'm not sure that it ever got recognized with the state. It was recognized within the tribe, and going back to what Chief Shields was saying earlier about when Governor Allen said it's okay for us to go in and get our birth certificates corrected, we went back to those birth logs and found people who never had registered with the state of Virginia. So I'm not sure that the state ever got everybody, but we have our genealogical database of those people, and they were primarily people who had left the state of Virginia, so they had no need for certifications and things like that from the state. But the state did not have a record of everyone on our birth registry. So I don't know that they ever recognized them.
Our midwives the records did get reported in Richmond, but some of them got changed by Plecker. But you can see the document, how it got changed. That's how we were able to get it corrected finally. And Ann's right that we had people that didn't have birth certificates. I had to work with one gentleman, and he was like in his 30s, and he didn't have a birth certificate, but he had a job, and he had gone to school. And I worked with the Department of Vital Records with everything that I could find to prove who he was, including his mother's birth certificate and his parents' marriage license and all of that, everything. And they would not issue him a birth certificate, so I had to go to court with him, and we got legal aid to help us. And we went to court, and the judge couldn't believe that here stands this man, and his mother's sitting right next to him, and the Department of Vital Records wouldn't issue him a birth certificate. So we got a court order for the Department of Vital Records to issue him a birth certificate.
So
We'd like to thank everybody up at the stage in our panel. This concludes the panel.